everyone. I'm David Lee, the Game Dev Product Manager at Visual Studio.
And I'm Keith. I'm currently working on Sea of Thieves as an engine and rendering programmer at Rare. I've worked on many areas of Unreal Engine, but mainly with the particle system to help our VFX artists make the best effects they can.
Since last year's GDC, we have been working hard to build major Unreal Engine integrations that you have all been waiting for. In this talk, you'll hear how Rare uses Visual Studio's natvis system to tackle some unique challenges while developing Unreal Engine games, like Sea of Thieves and Everwild. Then, I will introduce some of our brand new Unreal Engine integrations you will find in the latest version of Visual Studio. I'm thrilled to share with you all these wonderful features. I want to give a shout out to all of you who give us valuable feedback through developer community, social media, and surveys. We heard you loud and clear. Since last year, we have continued to improve Visual Studio's performance while spending up efforts to build Unreal integrations aimed at increasing your productivity. What you see here today is only a part of what we have in store for you. Let's get started. Keith, I often hear from our Unreal devs about the challenges they face while debugging Unreal Engine games. How do you tackle them at Rare?
While debugging, it is common to be overloaded with information in the debugger due to the complexity of the data types that we use in Unreal Engine and in our games. By creating custom visualizations for our data types, we can greatly improve the debugging experience and our productivity. Before we begin, let's have a quick refresher on natvis. This is the markup that Visual Studio uses to visualize data types in the Visual Studio watch window when debugging. It is marked up in XML, so it should be accessible to all, and there's a great set of docs for natvis, which we will link in the description of this talk. Below, we have an example of what a visualization of std vector might look like. All visualizations start with a type element, which defines what type visualization will be for. And from there, we can describe how we want the type to look in the watch window using the type's data members. For std vector, we add two elements here for size and capacity by doing some pointer math on the begin and end pointers of the vector. In this example, I have created a vector of strings. If we were to set a breakpoint in code after this vector is defined, we would see the following in the watch window of Visual Studio.
Great. We can see every member of this vector. So what would happen without natvis?
If we didn't have natvis, this would be displayed instead. It would display exactly what a std vector contains. And in this Microsoft Standard library, a vector only contains this one member, which is a scary-looking pair. Not particularly helpful when you want to see the contents of the vector.
Right. natvis is a tool that we can use to improve the visualization of our data types in the Visual Studio debugger. Keith, can you give us another example of how you use natvis to improve your debugging experience?
While developing Sea of Thieves, I often come across situations where I must analyze the contents of large containers. In this example, we have a large array of actors. Actors are essentially the game objects in Unreal Engine. Here, all I care about are the hidden actors. It would be painful to have to go through each element of this array to find the hidden ones. Instead of going through this pain, we can just write a visualizer to help us.
Exactly. What makes natvis unique is its ability to be programmed to your desires. You can make a natvis file, put it in your projects, and define visualizations using XML.
In this example, I wrote a visualization that filters out elements of our T-array. This effectively uses a while loop to iterate through the elements of the array. The if element here will check if the B hidden member is 1. If it is, then it will display it using the item element. With this applied, we will get the following.
Look, we are now only left with the 13 actors that have B hidden set to 1 or true. That's very helpful when you only want to see what you need. How else does the natvis file help you?
Let me show you how you can simplify types with natvis. From our previous example, we might want to inspect some properties of these hidden actors. For example, their components. But when we open one of the elements, we are greeted by a huge number of properties. In this case, finding the properties we care about can be especially tedious if we have to go through every in the array.
With natvis, you can simplify the type to give you exactly what you want.
Yes, this is a visualization that specifies the members of actor that we care about and want to see. Now we have our filtered array, and we are able to see only the members that we care about for the actors that are in the array.
Thanks, Keith. This is awesome. Using natvis while debugging Unreal Engine projects is a powerful way Visual Studio can boost your productivity. At Visual Studio, we consistently receive your feedback about various ways to enhance the Unreal Engine development experience. As a result, we work with first-party studios like Rare to develop deep Unreal Engine integrations for Visual Studio 2022. To use these integrations, make sure the IDE support for Unreal Engine is checked in the game development for C++ workload in the Visual Studio installer. You will also need our free, open source Visual Studio tools for Unreal from GitHub or on the Unreal Engine Marketplace. Let's now talk about some of the cool new features in Visual Studio for Unreal Engine developers. One of the top requests we received was to show Unreal Engine blueprint references in Visual Studio.
That's right. We often need to see what blueprint classes inherit from C++ classes. When we refactor our code, we need to know where these C++ classes are referenced, so we know which blueprints might break with our code changes. Previously, we had to launch the Unreal Editor and search the blueprints from there.
Available in VS 17.5, you can now see Unreal Engine blueprint references and assets without leaving Visual Studio. When you open your Unreal Engine project in the latest version of Visual Studio 2022, you will now see blueprint references for UE classes, functions, and properties as a colon hint. After clicking on the hint, you'll be presented with the list of reference blueprints. For blueprints that have an associated asset, you can double-click on the reference to open the Asset Inspector. Since the Asset Inspector opened as a new tab, you can resize it or dock it any way you want.
This feature will help to give a great productivity boost by reducing the need to context switch between Visual Studio and the Unreal Editor every time we need to track down a blueprint.
I'm very glad to hear that. Another request we've heard was the need to add Unreal Engine classes without the Unreal Editor.
Yes, previously if you wanted to create a new class, you had to go through the Unreal Editor, which can take a while to open, or you had to go through the tedious process of creating a blank header and source file to start from scratch.
Now, you can add an Unreal class without leaving Visual Studio. You can simply right-click on your project in the Solution Explorer, then click Add UE Class to open the Add New Item wizard. In the pop-up window, you can select one of 4 default templates. Once you give your class a name, Visual Studio will automatically add the class for you.
Great! No more having to write out the same UObject class code every time I want to make a new UObject class.
Keith, this next feature is a result of us working closely together. I remember when you gave feedback about experiencing productivity challenges while working with Unreal macros.
Yeah, some macros in Unreal can be quite long and deeply nested. As a result, when passing the wrong arguments to a macro, it can be very hard to know what's wrong when we can't see the fully expanded code that is produced by the macro.
When you hover over a macro in VS 17.5, you can now copy or expand the macro. No more guessing what some of these macros do.
Awesome! I won't have to expand the macro out by hand again.
Lastly, we have completely revamped our search experience based on your feedback. The new all-in-one search will allow you to easily filter your results. You can now not only preview your code while searching, but also perform common refactoring actions from within the search window.
Does this mean I will be able to edit the code without leaving the main file I'm working on with only a hotkey?
Yep.
I already use Ctrl-T to zip around the code, but this makes it even better.
2022 has been a busy year for us at Visual Studio. None of these features would have been possible without all your feedback. We only showed you a sneak peek at some of the features we have been building. We would love to hear how these new Unreal Engine integrations in Visual Studio are improving your productivity. Let us know your thoughts on Twitter at VisualC or in the developer community as we continue to build features for you in 2023. If you haven't already, download Visual Studio 2022 today and try out all these new Unreal Engine integrations.
Thanks for that, David. That's all we have for now. Thanks for watching.